Super Nintendo. It's a really good game. So a lot of you already know that the Super Nintendo is one of my favorite consoles of all time. I think you would pair that with the NES and say it's 1A, 1B. Right there at the top. My mother would not get me a Super Nintendo when it was coming out. She said, hey, you already got one of those Nintendos. You don't need another one. Same thing with Chris. Well, that year when it came out, my grandmother came through. She said, hey, you know what? I'm going to get us a Super Nintendo with some games, and it's going to stay at our house, but at least you guys can have it. So it was kind of like everybody pulled their gift together into getting this Super Nintendo and games. The only caveat, of course, was that it had to stay at my grandfather's house, but it didn't matter because I was about a minute bike ride away. Chris, a little bit longer, but we would still be there every Friday night into Saturday playing Super Nintendo, and it was awesome! So with that out of the way, let's get right to the list. Growing up, I loved the Alien movies, and I loved when a game based itself off of a movie. So when Alien 3 came out, I knew that I had to rent it. And rent it I did. I was immediately impressed with this game. It was extremely fun to me. Now each area, you had to go to this computer terminal and you could select which missions you wanted to do in any particular order that you wanted. It actually kind of gave me that feeling like I was, trying to maintain this base, and it wasn't just like any other game. We kind of go through the levels with just a basic story. But the game was fun and it was very atmospheric, kind of like how a lot of people say that Super Metroid is a very atmospheric game. I thought that this was very atmospheric as well. You kind of get this sense of dread and danger throughout the whole thing with all the sound effects, the music, and you would hear a noise and know that there's an alien just creeping right on the past where you could actually see on the screen, and it was very unnerving. Number 20 goes to Alien 3. So when we first got the Super Nintendo and opened it up there on Christmas night, we had a stack of games. And by stack of games, I mean we got to choose 4 games with it. Super Mario World, as much as I was anticipating that game, the first game I actually put in was Pilot Wings. Growing up, my dad was into aircraft because that was his profession. And so I was always drawn to aircraft as well. And I was really anticipating this game because it felt like a real flight simulator. Felt like you were flying, or at least it looked that way in the pics of Nintendo Power where I saw it at. My very first taste of Super Nintendo in person was skydiving on Pilot Wings. I was blown away by the visuals, the way the Mode 7 kind of Mode 7'd around, making it look like you were actually falling into the ground. This was something I'd never seen before, and I was seriously blown away by this. I thought this was one of the most amazing things I'd ever seen in my life. And the thing that really also stuck out was the sound. The sound of wind going past your ears. It literally sounded like wind going past your ears. I'd never heard sound like this on a video game before. So I was just, from a technical standpoint, blown away by everything that I was seeing and hearing from this game. But even if you take that away, because it kind of really is a tech demo if you think about it, it kind of showcases what the Super Nintendo can do. But even if you take that away, I do think that this still is a really just fun game to play just by its merits of gameplay. It was frustrating, but when I finally beat it, I was so happy with myself. But it goes down still as one of my favorite games of all time, and I think it's very overlooked. Next up on my list is the RPG Soul Blazer. RPGs were definitely a genre that I was not into growing up. However, this one kind of caught my eye. And honestly, it really didn't seem like an RPG to me. It didn't then, and it still kind of doesn't now, even though everyone pretty much classifies it as such. I always steer clear from RPGs growing up because they kind of seemed boring, especially the turn-based ones. I kind of got over that as I got older, but growing up, I really wanted action and adventure type games. And this one kind of seemed more of an action adventure type game. To me, this kind of resembled more of like Legend of Zelda. I remember when I first rented this game, I hadn't beat it before it was time to give it up, and I was so frustrated that I really just kind of grinded those last couple hours before I had to return it, and I ended up beating it. So it's not one of those games that I go back and play often. I've only played it through twice, But I think I have it on my list just because of the impact that it had on me. I had never played a game kind of like that in a way, and so I was very impressed with it. It didn't really translate into me getting into other games kind of like that, like Secret of Mana, but for what it was in that time period, I had a good time with it. Number 17 is Batman. Final Fight just barely missed making this list. Now, I've never really been particularly good at beat-em-up games. I tend to always suck, but I still love playing them. And I think at the top of this list, Batman Returns has to be there, even over Final Fight. And I think that it's because it's Batman. And I like Batman. Batman's amazing. He's awesome. This is, I don't know why, but this is just, I guess, the quintessential like winter or Christmas game for me. And I think that's probably because it has snow and Christmas trees. That probably has a lot to do with it. But whenever I think of video games in the winter, this one always comes to mind. And the graphics and sound are amazing, especially the sound. Let me tell you, when you punch somebody or you take them and you throw them up against the wall or the glass and you hear that shatter, it's so satisfying. I can't even tell you. I took out so much frustration and anger as a child, well, teenager, playing Batman Returns. And let me tell you, when I do get a little bit angry these days, a little Batman Returns goes a long way to curing what ails me. So those of you who watched my NES Top 20, you know that Mega Man holds a special place in my heart right here. So how could I not put Mega Man 2, Mega Man X on this list? So it's like Mega Man times X. Now, a lot of people were confused thinking that meant it was Mega Man X. And let me tell you, I was one of the smart cookies. I realized that was just to make it sound cool, not tell you that it was the 10th in the series. But I don't know where I'm going with that. Mega Man really did translate well into the 16-bit era. The graphics, the sound, the gameplay, they upped the ante on all of it. And it came together in what I think is just a true masterpiece on the system. And I could be wrong about this, but it really does seem like there's a lot more secrets to be found in Mega Man X than there is in the previous Mega Man games on the NES. I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia for it. I rented it once when we were growing up, and it's always been one of those games, though, that I'll pop in from time to time and play, even as an adult. I was not into fighting games at all. However, Mortal Kombat came out on the Super Nintendo, and I checked it out, and I liked it. When Mortal Kombat 2 came out, and there was more characters and blood, bona fide classic on the Super Nintendo. For a while, me and Chris would do nothing but play this game. Until his mother happened to come over to our grandparents' house and see us playing. And she did not approve of him. I mean, I could do whatever at this point with video games at home, but not him. As soon as she saw that I sliced somebody's head off, it was like, Chris, why are you playing this game? And she gave him the what for, and he was no longer allowed to play Mortal Kombat 2. And I just laughed. I laughed, but at the same time, I was like, well, now who am I going to play with? So I didn't have any friends. I mean, who wants to play a fighting game with themselves? Nobody. That's just stupid. That's like the worst thing in the world. But alas, I think his mom eventually forgot about it, or we just didn't care, and we played anyway.
She was like, I don't think they should be playing that. It was like a big taboo, no, we don't want our kids playing that. But somehow they never took it from us, so we just kept on playing it. Finish it.
Scorpion wins.
Alright, sticking with the fighting game theme, Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 2 are pretty much the only fighting games I ever play and have always ever played. Now, the reason I put Street Fighter 2 above Mortal Kombat is probably just because I spent more time with it. And it was the first one that I had gotten. I really loved the music, the graphics, the sound, everything kind of came together, and I thought it was a really great port And it's kind of funny how the things you look back at, the things that kind of grab you, I remember being just absolutely amazed. And I know I use that word a lot, but I'm talking in the perspective of a 13 or 14-year-old me sitting here playing this game. I was amazed that the foreground had perspective. So when you move from left to right in the screen, it kind of looked like real perspective. It moved in the way that would in real life, and I thought that was super cool. Probably why it had so much mega power. Yeah, there was mega power on the Super Nintendo too. Don't let anyone tell you that there wasn't. Even more super mega power than anything the Sega could put out. But I'd love to play as Guile and Vega for some reason. I loved Vega because I would pretend that I was an alien going super fast up and down the screen, and Chris would be like, "Oh no, don't kill me!" And man, I whooped his ass every time, and he never stood a chance. So yes, Street Fighter 2, it's a good turbo. So of course, having the Super Nintendo at my grandfather's house and knowing that Chris was going to be there with me when we played it usually, man, we were always looking for two-player games. And one that sticks out till this day still that was really fun was Joe and Mac. I love dinosaurs and I love cave women and men. This is just one of those Super Nintendo games that from the beginning of playing it, it just kind of drew me in. And a lot of that I think has to do with the theme, the nice tropical theme that was going on. The colors, the graphics really popped, and they weren't dingy and grungy to look at. They were really fun to look at. The graphics just stood out. They popped. I've always been drawn to games like that. I always thought the boss fights were really fun, the different power-ups that you could get, and the fact that you could play two players simultaneously at the same time, which is kind of redundant to say. Definitely puts this on the list just for all those different reasons, and the music is pretty good too. So if you've never played Joe and Mac, I suggest you get your butt right to your local video game renting place and pick yourself up a copy. But of course, after this video finishes, they still have rental stores, right? That's a thing still. Okay, now this one we're really hitting the nostalgia bug with. A lot of the ones on this list so far have just kind of been games that I've rented. Really wasn't a whole lot of anticipation or build up or anything like that outside of Pilot Wings. But this one, oh man, did I anticipate this one coming out. And that's Super The Empire Strikes Back. I remember seeing the spread on this particular game coming out in Nintendo Power, and they even did like a making of behind the scenes thing. So it was a couple of page spread, and they showed the different sprites that they were using. And they showed the Hoth battle, screenshots from it. And I remember looking at that and being like, holy crap, it's in 3D. 3D ended up being mode 7, but 3D in my brain. I saw this like you could be in the snowspeeder fighting the Imperial Walkers on this 3D field going around. I thought this was going to be the most badass game in the world. I was a little bit disappointed when the game initially came out and it was crappy mode 7 that did not translate too well. The Super Empire Strikes Back was without a doubt one of my most anticipated games. I could not wait for this thing to come out. And I guess it was one of those situations where my hype was too big and the expectations were too high, so it kind of didn't meet them. But I still thoroughly enjoyed it, and I still think it's one of my favorite games of all time on the Super Nintendo. So number 11 on my list is going to surprise a lot of people out there because it's a sports game. Ken Griffey Jr Presents Major League Baseball. A lot of people might not know this, but I grew up a big sports fan. I liked video games, but I also liked sports. I liked baseball and football the most. And I could not get enough of baseball. I literally had friends and we would go out and play in a sandlot. And so by the way, I love the movie Sandlot. But Ken Griffey was a blast, and I can't tell you how many times Chris and I have pretty much just gotten into the biggest heated fights over this game. The Super Nintendo for a long time still remained at my grandfather's house. Even after his passing, I had at that point bought my own, but the families had still been there. And so whenever we got together on Thanksgiving and Christmas, up until our 20s and 30s, Chris and I would immediately after dinner run in to the bedroom. That just sounds f***ing horrible. We would go to one of the other rooms in the house, hook up the Super Nintendo, and play Ken Griffey Jr. That was probably the first game we'd play, and then a little Mortal Kombat 2 and Street Fighter 2. But we would at least try to get a couple of games of Ken Griffey Jr. in. And to this day, we still play it. I mean, so yeah, it's one of my favorite games on the system. So thank you everybody for tuning in to the first half of my top 20 Super Nintendo games of all time. Stick around for things. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. Take care and see you in the next video. So here's the end screen. Subscribe and be sure to hit the bell button so you actually get notifications. But yeah, subscribe. There's a video here. I don't know what's going to be here yet, but check that out. Patreon, if you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that. And in the description of this video, there's links to get DVDs and shirts. Bye, Super Nintendo.